This boy's name is So-Jun. He has a personality disorder, a genetic disease that has no human emotions. That day at school, the boy killed a bunch of rabbits. The teacher curiously asked why So-Jun killed them. He calmly replied that he wanted to know what was in their stomachs. The teacher was very scared after hearing that, and she was also very scared of this student. In the end, the boy's father was called to school to talk. After learning about his son's unusual behavior, the father angrily went home to find his son and beat up this boy. This made So-Jun hateful. When this boy got home, he brutally killed his father. Since then, he has been addicted to the feeling of killing. 10 years later, a mother was walking home. On the way, she met a little girl running to ask for help. The girl said that my car had an accident on the side of the road. The kind mother immediately went to help, but was unexpectedly attacked by an adult So-Jun. So-Jun was extremely cruel. A week later, the police found the woman's body. She had been decapitated, and in her hand was a series of numbers and letters that made no sense. There had been more than 18 similar victims who had lost their heads. The police all over the country were still unable to find the murderer. The president could only promise the people that he would personally preside over the investigation. They called in Professor Daniel, a psychologist. He pointed out that this was a very rare personality disorder and that the person had the genes of a serial killer. The professor could do a genetic test in the early stages of pregnancy, and if the genes of the murderer were discovered, an abortion could be forced. The National Assembly seemed to agree after hearing this. Although this method was negative, it solved the problem of serial murders, but while the National Assembly had yet to make a decision, the murderer So-Jun continued to kill. So-Jun was a surgeon, he had a wife, and she was pregnant. That day, a family of 4 came to the campsite. Because it was snowing heavily, there was no one here today. When the mother went to get water, she encountered So-Jun. The father desperately rushed to hold him back, while the mother panicked and put her 2 children in the car and ran away. But it was too cold, so the car couldn't start. Seeing that the murderer had killed her husband and was coming towards them, the mother suppressed her pain and told her son to take good care of his younger brother. She went out to lure the murderer and accepted to sacrifice herself in the hope of saving her 2 children. The 2 brothers witnessed their mother being murdered. The younger brother cried out in fear, while the older brother accidentally made his younger brother faint because he covered his brother's mouth. Seeing the murderer approaching the car, the older brother put his younger brother in a suitcase and stuffed it under the closet while he hid in the closet. At this time, the murderer got in the car to search. Seeing him about to open the suitcase, the older brother rushed out to lure him. As a result, the older brother was still brutally killed by So-Jun. The younger brother looked through the hole and witnessed everything. At this moment, the police appeared and quickly took the children to the emergency room. Police officer Park quickly arrived. Although the child was still in shock, he still tried to ask what the murderer looked like, because police officer Park's wife and children were also killed by this murderer. His colleagues stopped him because they wanted the boy to calm down. At this time, the boy suddenly pointed to the wall and said that it was this man. It turned out that on the wall was a picture of So-Jun. Because he was a famous doctor, there was a poster. At this time, So-Jun was at home when the police arrived. They quickly handcuffed this serial killer. Because the victims were all headless, the police rushed to search for clues, but they couldn't find any heads in the house. The team leader asked if they were wrong. They shouldn't have listened to a child and done that. So-Jun saw this and immediately showed a smug expression. He thought that the police couldn't find any evidence. At this time, the surviving boy secretly stabbed So-Jun with a knife and then ran away, causing the snowman in the garden to break, and the 2 heads in the snowman fell out. The police were shocked when they saw this scene. The boy recognized it as his mother's hairpin at first sight. The next day, the news was all over the newspapers, but after being arrested, So-Jun kept telling the press that he knew nothing about the 2 heads that the police found. Because the witness's testimony was only a boy, so the court canceled the order and released So-Jun. Police Park was agitated to force So-Jun to reveal the whereabouts of his daughter. He was extremely angry but could do nothing. So-Jun's wife was sitting outside with Professor Daniel. She asked the professor if a personality disorder could love someone else. The professor replied that a personality disorder only loved themselves and did not love anyone else. Besides, the murderer was leisurely answering the press that he confidently said he was innocent. But when he approached and pretended to hug his wife, the wife suddenly asked him if he was the murderer. It turned out that last night when she pulled the curtains, she saw her husband building a snowman in the yard. She accidentally took a photo as a souvenir. Now that the wife brought out this photo, so the evidence was clear, So-Jun could no longer deny his crime. He admitted that he was stopping the car in the middle of the road when the husband accidentally asked for directions to the campsite. After giving directions, he immediately identified the 4 of them as targets. The wife asked So-Jun why he didn't love her but got married. His words shocked everyone. He said that he needed to create a descendant of a serial killer, which was the 2nd generation So-Jun. The wife was pregnant and about to give birth, so she was hospitalized the next day. She asked Professor Daniel to do a genetic test on her child, and the professor said that the child had a personality disorder gene. The wife was completely devastated. She couldn't bear to abandon her child, but if she left it, it was very possible that the child would become a murderer like the father. Here So-Jun's wife accidentally met a pregnant mother who looked like her, and the fetus in the pregnant mother's mother's womb also had a personality disorder gene. This pregnant mother decided to keep the child. She believed that she would educate her child well. Hearing those words, Sojun's wife also decided to keep the child. So later on, there would be 2 children with personality disorders born. Time quickly passed. 20 years later, Sojun, although he had killed 21 people, was only sentenced to life in prison because Korea had abolished the death penalty. Sojun sat in prison, leisurely reading the newspaper. The news showed that outside there was a murderer even more terrifying than him, and it was very possible that it was his son. Up to now, more than 30 victims have been murdered in succession. The day before, a boxing hall owner was tied to a chair and burned to death. The next day, on a rainy night, a woman who had just finished work was followed by a murderer. When she entered a deserted alley, the woman was brutally murdered and she was still wearing a ring on her hand. The next day, the police found the woman in the sewer and her ring finger had been cut off. Police officer Mu Chi was present at the scene and was extremely angry. Later, Mu Chi went to prison to meet Seojun and told him that it seemed that his son was also a serial killer. Hearing this, Seojun was very curious and wanted to meet his son. When Seojun returned to his room, he asked the prison guard to bring him some needles and thread. The terrible case that Seojun caused made both the prison guard and the police here afraid of him. This prison guard was new, and because he didn't know anything, he refused. Then, the prison guard told the doctor in the cell what had just happened. The doctor reminded Sojun that he had killed many prison guards here, so if he asked for anything unreasonable, they should fulfill it. It was too late for the prison guard to be afraid now. Today, the prison organized a circus show for the prisoners. At this time, a policeman appeared. He was Ba-Rome, the son of the second pregnant mother at the beginning. Although Ba-Rome had a personality disorder gene, he was currently an extremely gentle policeman. Ba-Rome was friends with the brave prison guard just now. The two of them carried a cabinet to perform a circus show for the prisoners later. The prison guard told Ba-Rome that he was extremely disappointed with this place. The death row inmates here lived leisurely on the people's taxes, but the death row inmates lived leisurely and had no regrets. Ba-Rome didn't know what to say after hearing this. At this time, Ba-Rome noticed Sojun in the distance. Sojun also looked at the two of them. Seeing this, Ba-Rome quickly turned around to avoid him. On this side, police officer Mu Chi and his girlfriend went to the scene to investigate. The girlfriend described the victim's position in the sewer. At that time, the victim's finger was broken, pointing towards the cross on top of the church. It seemed that the murderer was intentionally insulting the cross. Next, they went to the boxing gym of another victim. The broken finger was pointing towards the cross outside the window. These two cases also had one thing in common. The toy ring the girl gave the female victim had disappeared, and the boxing gloves of the male victim were also nowhere to be found. The murderer had intentionally collected the spoils after the murder, which meant that the murders would not stop. At this time, Ba-Rome was performing a circus act in the prison. The prisoner Sojun was also present. Ba-Rome now put a prisoner in a box and then turned the box to make the prisoner disappear. Unexpectedly, when the box was opened, everyone was stunned. The prisoner inside had been changed to a prison guard with injuries all over his body. Everyone here was panicking. Only Sojun was extremely calm. Everyone hurriedly called for a doctor to help, but there was no one. Currently, there was only prisoner Seojun, who used to be a doctor. The situation was so urgent that Seojun could only give first aid to the victim. Thanks to that, the prison guard was able to save his life. Then Ba-Rome took the prison guard to the hospital for emergency treatment. While waiting, something else happened. A woman, because of the death of her child, she leaves the world by herself but didn't succeed. At this time, Dr. Johan appeared. He coldly said that next time you wanted to die, you should cut it here. These words made the people here very angry, but everyone did not know that Johan was Sojun's biological son and was also one of the two children with the personality disorder gene, along with Ba-Rome. In another development, Bong Yi was an orphan girl. Her parents were also killed by Sojun, so Bong Yi was often scared. Every time she walked in the rain, she would panic. Ba-Rome passed by carelessly, making Bong Yi scared. Bong Yi's grandmother went to beat Ba-Rome. Only when the grandmother realized that it was Ba-Rome, the police did she stop. After that, the grandmother took Ba-Rome home for dinner. The grandmother felt that Ba-Rome was very kind, so she always wanted Bong Yi and Ba-Rome to get to know each other. Seeing Ba-Rome caring about Bong Yi's wound, the grandmother suddenly smiled. Bong Yi liked Ba-Rome, so he also looked shy. At the same time, the murderer went to kill again. This time he noticed a girl. After killing the girl, he took a picture and posted it on the wall. The next day, Ba-Rome and his colleagues went on patrol and found a dead cat. The poor cat had all its teeth pulled out. Ba-Rome couldn't stand this and looked for a place to vomit. His colleagues saw that he was so shy, so they let him go to work posting notices. While he was posting notices, he met Bong Yi. There had been a lot of murders recently, so Ba-Rome told Bong Yi to bring the notice to school and told her to be careful wherever she went. Later, Ba-Rome met Bong Yi's grandmother. Seeing that her leg was injured, Ba-Rome carefully took care of her wound. From Ba-Rome's grandmother's words, Bong Yi didn't dare to walk in the rain because her parents were killed in the rain that year. Ba-Rome promised Bong Yo's grandmother that whenever it rained, he would come pick Bong Yi up from school. The next day, the police discovered the body of the girl from yesterday in the vineyard. What was even more frightening was that on the girl's body appeared the belongings of the 4 previous victims, including the shoes and watches of the homeless. Police Police officer Mu Chi felt extremely strange. There was no cross here, but the next discovery was even more shocking. The victim's hand was stuffed in her mouth. When they pulled this people's hand out, Mu Chi saw that the murderer carved a cross in the victim's mouth. What was even more frightening was that he also left Mu Chi a note saying that Mu Chi's deduction was very correct. He asked Mu Chi if he was satisfied with the gift I prepared for you. The case was broadcast on TV, causing a stir in public opinion. Professor Daniel returned to the country to investigate again. He suspected that the two children from that year had now become serial killers, so he went to the house of Seo-jun's wife, who was also Dr. Johan's biological mother. Daniel asked her if her son had been doing well these years. The mother said that her son was extremely kind and loved animals, so the professor's genetic test results must have been wrong. Daniel didn't know what to say, so he went home. He went to the hospital to observe Johan working. At that time, Johan was giving emergency treatment to a gang leader. The subordinate took out a knife and told Johan to be careful, but Johan suddenly put the knife to the subordinate's throat. The subordinate was scared and pulled the knife back. Daniel observed everything from afar. He felt that Johan had an antisocial personality. A moment later, the professor called to meet Johan. Johan immediately agreed to meet at a deserted park in the evening. That night, Johan went to the meeting place alone to meet Daniel. Johan climbed into the amusement park from the back door, very professionally. At this time, the professor was sitting alone inside the Ferris wheel when suddenly the Ferris wheel started moving. When he was about to get off, he was stabbed by a man in black. On this side, Ba Rome was eating with Bong Yi when she suddenly said that she wanted to marry him, which shocked Ba Rome. Bong Yi said that although she was still young, she knew how to cook and do housework, as long as he helped her take revenge on the murderer who killed her parents. Faced with the sudden confession, Ba Rome was embarrassed and refused. The confession failed, so Bong Yi immediately stood up and left. On this side, the man in black took the professor's body and threw it in the middle of the lake. When this guy turned around, this person was Dr. Johan. In another development, the female inspector, the ex-girlfriend of police officer Mu Chi, drove home. Dr. Johan was waiting there. He hugged her and said that he was afraid that everything would be exposed. Police officer Mu Chi happened to pass by and saw everything. He misunderstood that his ex-girlfriend had fallen in love with Dr. Johan. The female inspector then took Johan into the house to sleep with her. The next morning, when Johan woke up, he was already standing in front of the door. The female inspector hugged Johan, but his face was expressionless. A moment later, Johan went down to his basement. On the wall, he pasted all the pictures of recent murder cases. Police officer Mu Chi and his colleagues came to the crime scene because the amusement park cleaners found a lot of blood on the Ferris wheel. Outside the amusement park also had the professor's car. The blood stains were completely identical. They guessed that the professor had been murdered. Then the two of them went back to the professor's hotel to investigate who called to meet the professor at the amusement park. Bong Yi's grandmother received a phone call from the school. It turned out that Bong Yi had fought with a female student at school, so the female student's family wanted to sue the grandmother and granddaughter to the police station. The poor grandmother knelt down and begged repeatedly. Bong Yi painfully pulled her grandmother up. Bong Yi angrily said that the female student had spread false information about her first. After hearing this, the grandmother's expression changed and she went to question the student. Then, she taught the mother and daughter a lesson. When they got home, the grandmother said that although she had beaten the mother and daughter, the school had forced her to pay compensation before allowing Bong Yi to graduate. Bong Yi blamed grandmother for not forcing her parents to go out and buy alcohol that year, so they wouldn't have died. The grandmother sat down on the ground in pain. A moment later, the grandmother went into the house, took out a knife, and muttered that she would personally avenge her son. Grandma then went to find Ba Rome and asked him to take care of Bong Yi after she died. After saying that she went to a cleaning company to apply for a job, she needed to earn money to compensate Bong Yi for the fight at school. Very quickly, Grandma was called to clean the first house. Unexpectedly, that house belonged to Johan. Grandma didn't know anything, so she happily went to work and was completely unaware that she was about to get into big trouble. The police here also investigated and found out that the last person who talked to Professor Daniel on the phone was Johan. The police immediately called to make an appointment with Dr. Johan. Johan came out from the basement and forgot to lock the door. While he was talking to the police, he suddenly remembered that he forgot to lock the basement door. Johan was afraid that grandmother would go in there, so he wanted to go home quickly, but Mu Chi asked him to provide an alibi. Johan left a friend's phone number and hurriedly left. He drove very fast, hoping to get home soon. At the same time, grandmother was cleaning at home and accidentally saw the basement, so she went down to see. She suddenly discovered that the wall was full of photos of victims of recent cases. Grandmother was shocked and fell to the ground. 10 minutes later, Johan returned to see that grandmother had finished her work. Grandmother was extremely scared, but still tried to calm down. Johan immediately went down to the basement to check and found that a photo had been taken by grandmother. He hurriedly drove after grandmother, but grandmother quickly got on the bus and left. It turned out that grandmother had taken the photo of the girl in the vineyard case. She wanted to bring this photo to Ba Rome to report and arrest Johan. Unexpectedly, Johan was still driving outside and chasing her. By evening, grandmother had returned home. Bong Yi was away, so she called called out to no one, but no one opened the door. Grandma discovered that Johann was still following her behind. She was scared and ran into a small alley but was accidentally seen by Johann. Barome on this side received a distress message from Grandma. He immediately ran to Grandma, but when he arrived at the scene, he saw Grandma lying in a pool of blood. Seeing a man in black next to him, Barome immediately chased after this man. The chase was extremely intense. Barome was determined to catch this murderer, but when he crossed the street, he was hit by a car. Barome was angry and helpless because he could not chase anymore. Only saw Dr. Johann look at him and leave. Johann took the photo from Grandma and burned it to destroy the evidence. A moment later, the police arrived at the scene. Bong Yi walked home in the rain and heard from the neighbors that a murder had happened nearby. She didn't know anything, just followed to listen to the story. Police officer Mu Chi entered the scene of the crime. He discovered that the dead person was an old woman who looked very familiar. Mu Chi thought carefully and remembered the case 10 years ago. It turned out that her son and daughter-in-law were murdered by a murderer. Mu Chi was very angry and lamented why God was so unfair to the poor. A moment later, the grandmother's body was taken away. Mu Chi wiped the blood off Grandma's face so Bong Yi could see her grandmother. Bong Yi painfully and desperately called out to her grandmother in the rain. She only had her grandmother to rely on, and now Grandma was dead. Then Mu Chi went to the hospital to ask Barome what happened. Barome said that he had fought with the murderer earlier. He confirmed that the murderer was left-handed and smelled of mint. At this time, Dr. Johann was in the bathroom using his left hand to get shower gel. There was a lot of blood on the floor. His mother suddenly came to visit and found that Johann's jacket was covered in blood. After Johann finished bathing, he sprayed mint on himself. The mother came home to cook for Johann. She asked why his jacket was covered in blood. Johann lied and said it was the blood of the patient he had treated. A moment later, the mother drove home and listened to the radio talk about the case of grandmother that had just happened. The mother immediately collapsed. She had guessed that the recent cases were caused by her son. The mother regretted giving birth to this child. Barome's side had to stay in the hospital overnight because of a car accident. That evening, Johann quietly went to Barome's hospital room. Johann took out a needle to inject poison and kill Barome. Suddenly, there was a noise outside, so Johann had to hide. The person who rushed in was Bong Yi. She cried and begged Barome to help her catch the culprit. Seeing that there was no chance to do anything, Johann had to leave. After the death of the grandmother, the whole of Korea fell into crisis. This murderer was too arrogant. The police still haven't found any clues. Mu Chi watched the video and investigated all the paths that the grandmother took before she died. They found out that she had applied for a job at a cleaning company. Barome took the photo to the company to ask, but the boss lied that he had never seen this person because he was afraid of being implicated. When the wife saw the photo, she reacted. This person was the old lady who came to apply for a job there yesterday. The wife was about to report to the police, but the husband stopped her because after all, hiring the grandmother was illegal. The next day, the police sent people to investigate. Johann saw everything from above, so he called his cousin and asked this person to be his alibi. A moment later, the police officer asked about the cousin. The cousin said that Johann had been at his house all day that day. The police officer pretended to borrow Johann's cousin's phone for a bit. When he opened the phone log, he found that Dr. Johann had just called this cousin. The police officer called Johann back. On the phone, Dr. Johann asked the police if they believed him. Now the police officer began to suspect Dr. Johann. The police officer immediately reported this news to Mu Chi, his superior. Mu Chi immediately met with Barome to review the details of the cases and discuss a plan to trap the murderer. Barome stayed up all night to discuss. Unexpectedly, before they could do anything, the murderer killed another person. Captain Mu Chi's brother was murdered at home, and a cross was painted on the window. Police officer Mu Chi rushed to the scene. When he entered the house, he only saw his brother's body. Mu Chi was so heartbroken that he burst into tears. He swore that he would kill the murderer to avenge his brother. The next day, Mu Chi went to grandmother's house to look for clues and suddenly discovered that she had been to a cleaning company. Mu Chi immediately went to the cleaning company and asked to see the surveillance camera. The owner had no choice but to admit that grandmother had been there and at the same time gave Mu Chi the phone number of the person who hired grandma to clean. Mu Chi immediately called his colleague to investigate who hired grandmother. Then Mu Chi broke into Dr. Johann's house and discovered that there was a basement in his house. The murderer had recently kidnapped a child. If Johann was the murderer, the child must be in the basement. Mu Chi wanted to knock on the door, but Johann suddenly returned. Mu Chi hurriedly hid in the garage behind the house and accidentally found a pair of bloody shoes there. After going outside, Mu Chi gave the shoes to his colleague for a blood test and at the same time requested to quickly get a search warrant for the house. Suddenly, Mu Chi's ex-girlfriend came to Johann's house to play. She rummaged through the trash can and found a piece of bandage with grandmother's blood on it. Suddenly, Johann came over. The girl pretended to be calm and hugged him and hid the bandage. Johann also felt something was wrong. He knew his girlfriend was starting to suspect him, so he told her that he would tell her everything tomorrow. Suddenly, the girl received a call from Mu Chi. The police were afraid that the girl was in danger, so they called her out. After the girl left, Johann also hurriedly got in his car and ran away. Unexpectedly, as soon as he got out, someone deliberately crashed into the back of his car. This person was Mu Chi's Muchi's colleague who deliberately caused the accident to keep Johan. Suddenly the police arrived. The girl said she heard a baby crying in the car. The police immediately pulled out their guns and asked Johan to get out of the car to check. Johan had no choice but to obey. Muchi was watching from the side, very worried. His colleague reported that he could not get a search warrant for the house. At this time, Johan took down his suitcase. Now as long as Johan hid the missing baby in suitcase, Muchi would immediately rush over and kill Johan to avenge his brother. Unexpectedly, Johan opened the suitcase, but there were only clothes inside. Muchi was very surprised when he learned about the incident because there was no evidence, so Johan prepared to leave, but the police said that they still needed to check the trunk. Muchi waited with his gun ready to pull the trigger. Unexpectedly, they opened the trunk, but there was nothing inside. Muchi felt that everything was wrong. Shouldn't Johan have taken the baby out to kill him? So Muchi hurriedly returned to Johan's house and immediately broke the lock on his basement, but it was completely empty inside. The photos of the cases were also nowhere to be found. At night, when Johan was driving away, Baron secretly broke into his house and went into the basement. Unexpectedly, Baron found a secret door there. Baron saw photos on the wall, and these photos were all of Baron. As soon as Baron left, the police arrived. They had an urgent warrant for Johan's arrest. At this time, Bong Yi was sleeping when she suddenly saw Johan walking towards her with a knife. She quickly contacted police officer Muchi and said that the murderer had come to her house. Because she was familiar with the house, so Bong Yi successfully escaped from the house. Johan searched for a long time but still couldn't find Bong Yi. Bong Yi hid in a corner of the garden, not daring to breathe loudly. Suddenly, someone covered her mouth. Luckily, that person was Baron. He told Bong Yi to leave quickly to report to the police, and he would stay to catch the murderer. As soon as Bong Yi left, Johan was standing in front of Baron. At this moment, police officer Muchi also ran to meet Bong Yi. The two hurriedly returned to the house. As soon as they got downstairs, they saw Johan beating Baron. Above, Baron was lying in a pool of blood. Without thinking much, the police officer shot Johan straight in the heart. Johan collapsed in pain on the spot, tears of grievance flowing from the corners of his eyes, because in fact, Baron was the serial killer, and Johan had always been blamed by Baron. Just an hour ago, Baron kidnapped a boy. Baron put a mask on the boy and tied him up in the basement. Baron stood there and recorded a video and called the police to challenge them to find the boy. Because Johan knew that Baron was a serial killer, he came to kill Baron. Unexpectedly, Muchi misunderstood and shot him to death. Both of them were then taken to the emergency room. One had a damaged heart, the other had a damaged frontal lobe. The two of them combined could only save one person. Not long after Baron woke up, he looked at the beautiful bird in front of his bed. The first thing he did was take the bird out, heartlessly crush it, and throw it out the window. Such cruelty was Baron's style, but because he was a police officer, so no one suspected anything. Bong Yi, who still believed that Johan was the murderer, saw him lying unconscious on the bed and had the heart to pull out the breathing tube and block his nose, accidentally killing a kind person. Johan's mother was extremely heartbroken because her kind son had died unjustly. On this side, although Baron had regained consciousness, he had lost his memory because of a head injury. The murderer could not remember who he was at all. The doctor said that because Baron had to have his frontal lobe replaced, he would temporarily lose his memory and he would not even recognize his lover, Bong Yi, because everyone misunderstood that Baron had killed a serial killer. So the whole country now saw him as a hero. A year passed quickly. Baron recovered and still had amnesia. He did not understand why the image of Dr. Johan kept appearing in his mind, but Baron still went to work at the police station. One day while Baron was catching a thief, he accidentally saw the body of a woman on the canal bank. He felt that this person looked familiar but couldn't remember who it was. The police arrived shortly after and concluded that this was a robbery and murder case. However, Baron said that this was definitely a fabrication. The inspectors were surprised to hear this. His colleagues said that ever since Baron had brain surgery, he had suddenly become extremely intelligent. Baron also did not understand what was happening. Even just by looking at the photo of the girl's tied hands, Baron could describe in detail the murderer's way of committing the crime to Muchi. Baron said that the murderer intentionally stabbed the victim lightly so that the victim would not die, and at the last moment the murderer strangled the victim. That murderer was truly extremely cruel. This person had clearly killed so many people. Police officer Muchi was extremely surprised after hearing this. When he got home, he still did not understand how Baron knew all of this. At the same time, Baron also said that there would be another case like this. Sure enough, there was another murder the next day. Muchi invited Baron to the scene again. Baron only glanced at the scene once and described in detail the process of committing the crime. He said that the murderer slammed the girl's face into the mirror with the purpose of seeing the details of the victim's pain. The murderer was perverted, so this guy wanted to enjoy this feeling, then used a clothesline to strangle the victim. Muchi curiously asked why Baron knew these things. Baron just said that he felt that way. Seeing this police officer, Muchi begged Baron to help him catch the murderer, not knowing that Baron was the real murderer. Although Baron had lost all his memories, scary images still appeared in his head from time to time. That night, Baron chased a thief. When Baron reached an alley, he was suddenly attacked by the thief. The thief used a stick to continuously hit Baron. Baron unexpectedly knocked the thief down down, so he used both hands to punch the thief crazily and could not stop. It was exactly like the times he killed people in the past. The memories came back, causing Barome an unbearable headache, so Barome went to the doctor who performed his brain surgery and asked the doctor why so many murder scenes appeared in his head. The doctor said that after brain surgery, Barome would think that the scenes he saw were his own doing. When Barome was about to leave the hospital, he happened to meet Bong Yi. Bong Yi said that the doctor who operated on Barome was not an ordinary person. That day she saw that the doctor who operated on him was someone else. Barome went to the doctor again to ask about his surgery. Barome asked if he did it alone or with someone else. The doctor confirmed 100% that he did it. After Barome left, the doctor quickly contacted a mysterious person. Barome asked Bong Yi what the doctor looked like. Bong Yi said that the doctor had a scar on his face. Barome immediately thought of So-jun in prison because he was an extremely good neurologist. Barome wondered how So-jun could have operated on him since So-jun was in prison all the time. To find out the truth, Barome sent a photo of So-jun to Bong Yi for confirmation. Bong Yi looked at the photo and said it was this person. Barome was very surprised when he heard that. He quickly went to the prison to see So-jun. Barome asked So-jun if he replaced my brain with Johan's brain. It turned out that So-jun was the one who performed the surgery that day. He replaced Johan's frontal lobe with Barome's. So-jun's purpose was to let Johan continue to live in Barome's body. Barome clearly said he was a prisoner, but why could you go out and operate on me? At this time, So-jun began to tell everything. 25 years ago, he was a doctor with a passion for brain surgery. To practice, So-jun often operated on mice's brains, but failed many times, making So-jun extremely frustrated, so he came up with the idea of practicing on humans. That day, So-jun found a homeless man, so So-jun tricked him into having food to kill the man. Then, So-jun used the man's head to conduct the experiment of replacing human brains. Since then, So-jun has been addicted to brain surgery to the point of losing control. In 1 month, he chopped off more than 10 heads, and the whole family that went camping at the beginning were So-jun's victims. Currently, only So-jun knows how to do frontal lobe surgery in Korea. So on the day Barome and Johan were seriously injured, the president went to So-jun to ask him to save Barome. So-jun said that he would only do the surgery if he was released from prison, but releasing So-jun would mean hundreds of people would die every year, so the president could not accept this. She even knelt down and begged So-jun, because at that time Barome was the hope of the people, so he must be saved. So-jun suddenly agreed to this because he wanted to replace his son Johan's brain into Barome's body. Barome knew that part of his brain had been replaced by Dr. Johan, so he felt very guilty because Johan was So-jun's son. The more Barome thought about it, the more depressed he felt. Suddenly someone knocked on the door outside. It turned out to be Muchi. Muchi was drunk and punched Barome. Barome immediately grabbed Muchi's neck. This action was extremely professional. It seemed like Barome often did this before. Barome couldn't control himself and wanted to kill Muchi. He picked up the rock and smashed it down crazily. This action was no different from a serial killer. The next day, Muchi woke up and asked Barome if they fought last night. Barome said that last night Muchi was drunk and injured his hand. A moment later, Barome went out to the garden and remembered last night when he picked up the rock to hit Muchi. Barome didn't understand why he hit his hand. Maybe it was Johan's brain that stopped him. Then Barome hurriedly went to So-jun. He asked So-jun he sometimes couldn't control himself and always wanted to do something wrong. So-jun said that I once transplanted the frontal lobe of a ferocious mouse into a gentle mouse, and as a result the docile mouse became increasingly brutal. Barome was the first human So-jun experimented on. Now Barome has 2 personalities hidden inside him, which makes Barome very miserable. He wants the doctor to perform a surgery to fix his frontal lobe, but the doctor says I can't. So Barome suddenly grabs the doctor's collar and his personality becomes more and more violent. Suddenly Barome felt that he was being rude and left. One day Barome received a call reporting the crime. When he arrived at the scene, he saw that the woman's middle finger was caught in a string around her neck. This meant that she could not leave this world on her own. Suddenly, he remembered the previous murder cases. The victims all pointed their middle fingers at the cross. Barome immediately opened the woman's neck, and sure enough, the necklace had a cross. Barome opened the cross, and inside was a photo of Muchi's family. At the same time, Barome saw Bong Yi's grandmother's hairpin on this woman's clothes. If these 2 people were victims of the deceased Johan, then how could it appear here? Barome believed that Johan was wrongly accused of being shot dead. He wanted to prove that Johan's brain implanted in him was not a murderer's, but a normal person's brain. But Muchi always thought that Johan was a criminal because Johan was So-jun's son. Seeing that no one believed him, Barome secretly told himself that the real murderer was someone else. He would go and catch this murderer himself. At the same time, police officer Muchi was in the park when he smelled a foul smell. He immediately took out a shovel to dig and very quickly found a decomposing body there because at this time, another murderer had appeared. He knocked on a girl's door and said that he had goods to deliver. The girl didn't think much and opened the door. As a result, he locked the door as soon as he entered. A moment later, the woman was tied up. The murderer was about to take the next step when suddenly there was a noise outside. It turned out that the girl's boyfriend and Barome had arrived. The door was locked from the inside, so the boyfriend quickly quickly ran to call security. Ba-Rome stayed behind and saw a rope. He inserted it into the door through the gap above and closed it, successfully opening the door. Suddenly the murderer used a rope to strangle Ba-Rome from behind, but killer instincts arose, causing Ba-Rome to escape the necklock. Suddenly the murderer hit Ba-Rome, then jumped out of the window and ran away. Ba-Rome chased after the murderer, and man jumped onto the hood of the murderer's car, but he swerved and threw Ba-Rome away. Very quickly Ba-Rome drove the truck and crashed into the murderer's car. The murderer was scared and hid in an abandoned warehouse. Ba-Rome chased after him but was suddenly knocked unconscious. When he woke up, he was tied behind his back and the murderer used a rope around his neck. Ba-Rome asked him why he killed so many women. He said that he also had a personality disorder, so he had killed someone since he was a child. Since then he only liked killing women. He said that Ba-Rome was about to become the first man. Suddenly Ba-Rome was able to break free of ties and fight the murderer. Ba-Rome was so angry that he beat the murderer until the murderer had no more strength to fight back. Then Ba-Rome directly strangled the murderer until he was about to die. Suddenly many murder scenes appeared in Ba-Rome's mind. All of them were the deaths of previous serial victims. In the end, were these memories Ba-Rome's, or were they due to the frontal lobe transplant from Dr. Johann that appeared? In a fit of loss of control, Ba-Rome strangled the murderer to death. When Ba-Rome suddenly woke up, he realized that the murderer was dead. Now he had killed someone. Johann's image appeared before his eyes and spoke. Johann kept blaming him, making Ba-Rome extremely miserable. He couldn't accept that he was the murderer. Ba-Rome went straight back to the police station to confess. At this time his colleagues were searching for the murderer's whereabouts. Ba-Rome said that the murderer had been killed by him, so he quickly led the police to the abandoned warehouse. But when everyone arrived at the scene, the murderer's body was completely gone. Ba-Rome was very surprised that the murderer's body was clearly there, but now there weren't even any traces of a fight. The forensic doctor told Mu Chi that Ba-Rome might have hallucinated because of brain surgery. At this time his colleagues said that they had discovered the murderer's whereabouts. Sure enough, the police saw a photo of him sneaking out to the pier. Ba-Rome returned to the hospital to visit the girl who was raped by the murderer. Her boyfriend kept thanking Ba-Rome for saving his life. No matter how much Ba-Rome thought about it, he couldn't remember. It was obvious that he had saved the girl's life, so why was the scene of killing the murderer a hallucination? Ba-Rome rushed to the factory to find clues. He remembered the fight last night. When he lifted the wooden board, there were indeed signs of fire underneath. During the fight, he had kicked over the coal stove. Now, he was 100% sure that everything last night was true. Ba-Rome had just left when someone was peeping at him. It turned out that that night someone had really taken the body away to destroy it, and also brought detergent and cleaned the scene. Ba-Rome knew he had killed someone, so he decided to go and confess. But as soon as he arrived at the police station, he received a call. The mysterious man asked him if he was going to confess. Ba-Rome looked back and found that this was not his phone. It turned out that when he got off the bus, his phone had been switched. The mysterious man on the phone told Ba-Rome not to confess, and said that he wanted to meet Ba-Rome to tell Ba-Rome the whole truth. Ba-Rome immediately went to the location indicated by the mysterious man, but was unexpectedly drugged by this guy. After waking up, Ba-Rome was in a strange place. Ba-Rome walked out and saw an old man. This person was the famous professor who researched the personality disorder gene. He was also the one who cleaned up the scene last night. Professor Daniel said that after the frontal lobe surgery, Dr. Johann's gentle personality took over Ba-Rome, but since last night, after Ba-Rome killed someone, his evil personality has overwhelmed Johann's gentle personality, and from now on, Ba-Rome will kill people without stopping. A moment later, Ba-Rome returned to Bong Yi's house. Looking at his girlfriend sleeping, he suddenly had the idea of killing someone. Unconsciously, Ba-Rome suddenly reached out to strangle Bong Yi. He was extremely angry because he couldn't control himself, but when Ba-Rome was about to strangle Bong Yi, Johann's brain stopped him in time. Now Ba-Rome believed that what the professor said was true. He was scared and ran out. It seemed that the serial killer Ba-Rome was about to lose control, and to relieve his desire to kill, but still be righteous, Ba-Rome wanted to find the prisoners who were released from death row. That day he saw a criminal approaching Bong Yi. This person was the one who raped Bong Yi when she was young, but because he had a mental certificate, the court only sentenced him to 10 years in prison. Bong Yi's grandmother was extremely angry at that time. Seeing that person made Bong Yi so scared that she collapsed to the ground. Ba-Rome immediately chose this person as his target. Unexpectedly, before Ba-Rome could take action, the murderer took action first. That day it was raining heavily, and this people kidnapped Bong Yi's younger sister. Bong Yi didn't see her younger sister, so she quickly took an umbrella and ran out to the street to look for. The murderer brought Bong Yi's younger sister to a grass field. Just as he was about to kill the girl, Bong Yi rushed in to fight the murderer. Unexpectedly, he grabbed a rock and continuously hit Bong Yi, causing her to lose too much blood and faint on the spot. At that moment, Ba-Rome appeared in time. He immediately tortured the murderer and then used a knife to cut off 2 testicles of this guy. Finally, Ba-Rome brutally finished this guy off. The next day, the police arrived at the scene and found only the murderer's body. Thanks to Ba-Rome, the child was rescued and brought home, while Bong Yi was hospitalized to recover. She couldn't remember how she was rescued. The police were extremely frustrated because they didn't know who the murderer murderer was, because although the murderer had killed someone, he had saved 2 lives, and Baron suddenly felt like killing criminals. At the same time, another murderer appeared in Korea. This person liked to kill women who were alone. Baron counted that in 1 month he had murdered 10 victims. The police arrested 2 suspects and imprisoned them, including a kind old uncle who was wrongly accused, but the uncle was mute and could not explain himself. When the uncle saw Bong Yi, he wanted to cry because Bong Yi looked like his daughter. The other suspect was also interviewed by police officer Mu Chi. He was a good liar and fooled all the police there, but only Baron felt suspicious. That night, Baron and Bong Yi stayed up all night reviewing the details of the 10 cases. He deduced that it was definitely not the mute uncle who did it, but the police, under pressure from public opinion, found the mute uncle guilty in front of the press despite the lack of clear evidence. The real murderer was released. The female reporter was Mu Chi's girlfriend, and she gave him a ride. As soon as he got in the car, his murderous gaze was evident. He ate the apple while smiling wickedly. He quickly tied the female reporter up in a field, then calmly ate the apple. Just when he wanted to do something evil, Baron appeared in time. Baron dragged the murderer onto the grass. Baron filmed and forced him to confess all his crimes. He confessed that he had buried 10 victims in the hill behind his house. After he confessed, Baron killed him, and then Baron released the video on TV. The police indeed found 10 bodies behind the hill. That day, Baron saved the female reporter and also cleared the name of the innocent mute uncle. Just in time, the next day, the uncle's daughter got married. The uncle, who was vindicated, happily held a wedding for his daughter. Baron below also clapped his hands in joy. It seemed that now the 2 evil and good personalities in him had merged into one. That night, Baron made an appointment to meet Bong Yi and confess his love. Thanks to Johan's frontal lobe, Baron knew how to love. He believed that being close to Bong Yi would help him become good. The 2 held hands tightly and gave each other a passionate kiss. Baron thought he could start his life over, but at this moment, a big incident happened. That day, Baron accidentally saw a necklace at his house. When he met Mu Chi, he remembered that this necklace belonged to Mu Chi's brother. That was a victim that Baron had killed. Baron rushed home and searched everywhere, discovering many items of the victims. At this moment, the memories of the murderer suddenly came flooding back. Baron rushed to his old house and went to a corner of the garden and frantically digging the corner of the yard. Sure enough, he discovered a cellar door. Baron quickly went inside and realized that there was still a victim in the barrel. Meanwhile, on the wall were pictures of all 50 victims that he had murdered. Only now did Baron understand that the murderer was himself. Baron regained all his memories. He was the one who killed Mu Chi's brother. One by one, the scenes of the victims that Baron murdered appeared. He also cruelly took pictures of them and stuck them on the wall. So far, there have been more than 50 victims. Because Baron has no emotions, so he has to stand in front of the mirror every day to practice. He does this to live a fake life and hide his murderous face. Johan's frontal lobe has turned Baron into a kind person, causing Baron to be tormented and regretful, and this is like a punishment for him. At this time, he received a call saying that his prison guard friend had woken up. Baron remembered that this prison guard was also brutally killed by him. Baron burst into tears and regretted what he had done. That day, Baron stabbed the prison guard many times. Now that he has Johan's conscience, Baron does not dare to face the prison guard who is his friend. Every day, Baron has to live in regret. He wrote a suicide note and prepared to leave this world. Baron wrote down all his crimes, including the fact that Dr. Johan took the blame for him and died unjustly. That day, Johan discovered that under Baron's feet was a cellar that locked the boy. Johan wanted to beat Baron to death to save the child. Unexpectedly, Mu Chi misunderstood and shot Johan to death. Back in the present, Baron was overcome with guilt and wanted to jump, but when he was about to jump, he received a text message from his close friend, the prison guard, so Baron stopped jumping and returned to see his friend. The friend said he knew Baron was the murderer. The prison guard advised Baron to surrender because it was the best thing for everyone. Unexpectedly, when Baron left to surrender, an assassin came in and assassinated the prison guard to cover up the clues. Baron suddenly remembered that he had just met the assassin in the restroom. Baron looked outside and saw that this guy had just left. Baron immediately ran after him and quickly found him. Baron didn't say much and rushed in to beat him up, but the assassin got up and escaped. He was the one the Secretary General sent. Baron caught up with him again. Thanks to killer instinct, Baron easily caught him, but while Baron was controlling him, Baron was ambushed from behind. While fighting with the ambusher, Baron caused him to fall down the stairs and die. Taking that opportunity, the assassin got in the car and escaped. This guy ran and informed the Secretary General to clean up the scene. 3 minutes later, Baron returned and saw that the body had just fallen. He knew that it was the Secretary General who did this to cover up his crime. After all, he was just her experimental product. At his best friend's funeral, Baron was extremely heartbroken and decided to take down the Secretary General. He knew that he was always being followed by the Secretary General's assassins, so he deliberately went into a deserted area for them to follow. Very quickly, 4 assassins were tricked into an abandoned house and revealed themselves. Here Barome fought 4 people alone, but thanks to killer instinct, Barome quickly defeated them all. The 4 assassins had the OZ symbol tattooed on them. While Barome was forcing them to reveal the mastermind, they used Bong Yi to force him to release the person. They took the opportunity to sneak attack Barome and knock him out, but Barome was an experimental subject, so they let him go. That night Barome went to the Secretary General's house alone. She revealed the whole truth in front of Barome. She asked Professor Daniel for a list of children with personality disorders, then sent undercover agents to follow and protect them from a young age, and also help these children with personality disorders grow up safely. The purpose was for these children to kill as many people as possible in the future, so that society would fear people with personality disorders. Only then would the bill allowing abortion of children with disorder genes be passed, eliminate murderers while they are still in the womb. The Secretary General said that those were children like Barome. Hearing this, Barome angrily strangled the secretary, but he couldn't kill her, because if he killed more people, the bill would be passed even sooner. So Barome decided to surrender to the police. The Secretary General was also immediately taken away by the police. When Muchi learned that Barome was the real murderer, he could not believe that the person he had been investigating the murderer with all this time was actually the murderer. Barome told Muchi that he and the other murderers were all experimental subjects. In fact, the Secretary General was the mastermind behind it all. Muchi immediately arrested the Secretary General. Dr. Johann was therefore also vindicated. Although he had a personality disorder gene, he was extremely kind, and Barome was sentenced to life in prison because his crime was too serious. He was allowed to enter the prison where Sojun was imprisoned. That day, Barome sneaked into Sojun's cell. Sojun revealed that Barome was actually his son because the 2 pregnant mothers had swapped their children in the past. Sojun opened his arms to hug his son. He said that he had planned to get the 2 out of prison. The 2 people outside could kill whoever they wanted. Hearing that Barome stabbed Sojun in the heart, stabbing until Sojun was completely dead, Johann's conscience made Barome choke up and cry. What the law could not do, he would do. Finally, Barome ended the lineage of personality disorder genes and brought peace back to the country of Korea. Before Barome died, he asked to meet Muchi. He left Muchi all his assets to help the poor. The movie ends here. Thank you everyone for taking the time to watch.